Welcome everyone today. We're happy to have everyone here for our third CMP month webinar. We're going to start off, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to have our land acknowledgement. Just one moment. So if you can take a couple of minutes and just read this, please. En français. I would also like to acknowledge that OWL Practice is our lead partner for this month, and because of their partnership, we are able to provide 12 webinars free of charge to anyone who would like to attend. And also we are able to provide French interpretation. So we would like to thank them for their partnership. They also have prizes. Every single webinar that is attended, there's a prize for each one, and they've supplied most of the prizes. I would now like to introduce Scott. He's our speaker today, and I will be letting him take over and teaching you wonderful things about energy management. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for the introduction, Susan, and welcome everybody. I see we have a large amount of participants today. Really excited to be joining you. Thank you for the land acknowledgement, and very exciting to have the OWL Practice sponsor a few of these sessions that are coming up. And so I'm just going to take a moment here to share my screen, and we'll kick things off on the energy management habits for busy mental health professionals. And yeah, looking forward to having everybody here today. So just giving you a little bit of background on myself before we get started. So I am a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, and I've been a coach now for a little over 5 years, and have been giving presentations and workshops around self-management skills, leadership, time management, energy management, since starting as a coach, and I've done it for over 1,000 professionals over that time. I'm also the co-founder and COO of Intuitive Performance, where we focus on what we call as whole person performance. It really stems from this belief that organizations thrive when their leaders focus not so much on the job, but more on the people behind the job. And so we understand that, elevating performance really starts with understanding your people. And more on the personal side, maybe not right now, based out of Ottawa here. We've had a little bit of freezing rain, but over the summer months, you'll likely find me in Gatineau Park on my bike. And as we do the presentation here, also have, this is my puppy Piper. It was actually about 2 years old now. I should probably update that picture. But if anybody decides to make a delivery, we might have her featured in the background with a few barks, just letting everybody know that we might have that happen through the presentation. Otherwise, just give me a quick introduction as to what are we looking for and what are we looking to accomplish today. And so the overall objective here is really looking at how can we create a working routine that optimizes your performance in the workplace. So we'll be looking at things around energy management. How do you plan your day according to natural fluctuations in energy? How can you identify and minimize daily distractions that might be weighing you down, or might be actually taking energy away from you? We'll also look on the flip side. How can you leverage daily energy levels to be able to work at your best? And then finally, learning how to disconnect to really help optimize both that energy and focus throughout your day. A quick few guidelines for today as to how we'll conduct the presentation and everything else. So first off, I have here raise your hand if you're on screen and everything else, but where we're in the webinar format, we're actually going to leverage the Q&A. And so I like to make this as engaging as possible. Rather than having me stand up here and talk to you for the next hour, I want to get your input. And so let's utilize the chat function, or should I say, let's utilize the Q&A function to be able to either ask questions, or if I'm seeking your input, I'm going to ask you, how is this experience for you? Henning, how have you experienced this and how does this show up in your life? Otherwise, we won't be asking direct questions here, just where we're in the webinar format. And so we'll just really leverage that Q&A function as we move forward. So one thing I'd like to do as we kick things off is I'd like to better understand, what are the energy drains that might come up for you that may be impacting your work, impacting your daily life. And I'd like you to put them in the Q&A now. And I'm actually going to type them out here so that we can actually have a bit of a list as to what are the things that we're all experiencing that might be draining our energy. And so if you want to take a moment here and put it in, so we have Patty here who says paperwork. All right, too much paperwork, all that admin stuff, kind of taking away from some of my energy. We have Glenn who says aging parents. So that's, something outside of our control. Elizabeth here says, a lack of sleep. Commute time from Jessica. Let's see what else. We won't be able to read everybody's here, but we have a few things here. Lack strong boundaries. So here, I'll write in boundary setting, right? So we talked a little bit about rest. So administration we've touched on as well. So any repetitive tasks. So again, kind of coming back to that admin / type of admin or paperwork. Young children might be an energy drain. I can imagine, especially during COVID. I'm trying to talk and type at the same time. Sometimes it doesn't always work out here. We have young children. That's what we were getting at. A crisis with a client. So a client crisis, right? So that can definitely have an impact on your energy, especially in the field that you're working in providing that support for different members of your community. So limited lunchtime breaks. And so I'll just say limited breaks, because I can imagine if you're having clients back to back, or if you have limited time in between sessions to actually write out your case notes, that can really be an energy drain. Virtual work, we have lack of sunshine. Hopefully that is changing and that is coming up a little bit better. A tight schedule. Okay, I think we pretty much encompass a little bit about, what are the things that drain our energy, and really appreciate everybody kind of putting in their input here. But let's take a moment and why don't we look at the flip side? What are the things that actually bring us more energy? Let's take a look at that and figure this out together. Kind of fill out the energy gains here. Ooh, grounding techniques, Isabel. Next, I saw it there, breathing, being honest about what you can take on. So maybe honest about your capacity, being in nature, fresh air. So outdoors. I will say, I know it's read breaks here. I'll write down maybe refreshing breaks, because we know, if you're taking a break, but that break involves, scrolling through your phone or looking at emails, that might actually be a refreshing break. It might actually cause more of an energy drain. So we have here either gratitude, we have meditation, going outside, sunshine, nice weather. I see a theme here. Going into the spring, we're all thinking about the sunshine that's coming ahead. Creative pursuits. Okay, let's get a few more in here. So we talked maybe a little bit about exercise, good nutrition. Family, social time. Okay. And I see Christine here. Yeah, I see your answers being communicated here. There's just we have over 150 people here have joined in, so I can't read out everybody's, but I think this gives us a bit of a snapshot as to a better understanding as, what is it that drains our energy and what is it that we might actually gain energy from. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about, how much time is your day spent on the energy drains versus how much time is spent on your energy gains? And what if we can start prioritizing more of those energy gains into our day? What impact would that have on how you can show up for your clients, how you show up for your business, how you show up for those around you in your own personal life. And so really appreciate everybody kind of chiming in here and helping us, helping fill out this exercise. I'm just going to clear things out, clear out our drawings, and we'll keep moving through the presentation. And so one thing I wanted to touch on before we really jump into things is the difference between tasks and habits. And the reason I bring this up is because I want you to think about tasks as having a singular end. Tasks are things that we want to complete. So they have an end piece to them. While when we're looking at habits, they tend to be more ongoing. There's no end to them. When we look at habits, they tend to be things to improve. And so I encourage you as we go through the presentation to think about not so much what tasks can I do to help bring more energy, but what habits can I incorporate to help develop greater energy, to help, go back to those energy gains throughout my day. So looking at things to improve that you can incorporate throughout your day-to-day. Otherwise, if you joined us back in January, we had a presentation around more focused around time, energy, and attention management. But I did want to touch on this today, just talking a little bit about productivity. So often we talk about time management, but yet time is only one of the things that we have within our control that impacts our productivity or how we show up every day. And I'd like to call this maybe healthy productivity. And so there's also our energy as well as our attention. And so has that ever happened to you, let's say where you've been full of energy, you had a lot of focus, but you didn't have the time to really put yourself forward? Very difficult to be productive. The same can be said if you have time and maybe you're able to focus on something, but you don't have the energy to actually pay attention or actually complete what you're looking to do. And lastly, I think we've all been there. We've had time and energy in our hands, but we jump from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, which again makes it very difficult to practice healthy productivity. And so the idea here is when we're looking at how do we improve our healthy productivity, we're looking at things not just around time management, but rather energy management, attention management, as well as time management. And so for today's presentation, the primary focus will really be around that energy management piece. And how can we raise our self-awareness around fluctuations in our energy, understand what brings us and maybe drains our energy, and then make those small shifts or pivots that'll help us just show up with greater energy throughout the day. Now, how often have we maybe felt a little bit like this? I'll just do it later, right? With so many demands on our energy, it's easy to become drained, especially in the workplace. And so, and I see a few people using the emojis here. I encourage you as we go through, please, let's make this as interactive as possible. Use the emojis if you agree with something or if you want to incorporate it. Let's get the group here together so we don't feel like we're alone going through this. Also makes my job a little bit more fun as well. Thank you, loving it. So let's take a look at how are we managing our daily energy levels. So what's really interesting about this is how does the time of day impact your performance? And so studies show that our energy fluctuates probably about give or take 20% throughout the day. So what that means is, let's say on average, you're working at a 80% capacity, because let's be honest, we can't all be working 100% all the time. And so if on average you're working at 80%, there's times in your day that you're likely working more at 60%, and times in your day that you're maybe more working at 100%. But the idea here is, how can we be conscious of these fluctuations in our energy level and help align the tasks and the work that we're doing with those fluctuations? Now, an easy example of this is, have you ever been in a space where maybe you're working on a research paper and you felt like you kept rereading the same line over and over again, or the same paragraph, and it just wasn't sinking in? Well, you were probably at a lower or below average energy level at that point, right? And so where writing a research paper probably is best done when you're at your above average energy level. It's looking at, well, what is that fluctuation and how can I align tasks accordingly? We mentioned, paperwork or admin work. That probably requires a little bit less energy to focus on. It might be an energy drain, but it probably requires less energy to do as well. And so if you can align your day to focus on the higher, more important tasks like those research papers when you're higher energy, and then the admin work when you're lower energy, it can really have a big impact in your day. And I know it sounds really simple, But I'd be curious for you, even just checking with yourself, how often do you actually think about your fluctuations in energy and align your tasks accordingly? And so we're going to do a quick exercise here to better understand the different chronotypes and how our energy levels fluctuate throughout the day. And then at the end of it, we'll actually understand more as to how you can line up those tasks and what that means for you. So jumping into a quick exercise here, what is the best time for you to work? We're going to take maybe about 3 minutes here, and we'll identify an exercise to help you understand what is your chronotype. So it's talking a little bit about your circadian rhythm. We have people that are maybe night owls that we've heard about, right? That do their best work later in the night. Well, we have those that actually do more of their best work early in the morning. And so by raising your self-awareness about what works best for you can help you, again, come back to the idea around aligning your tasks with fluctuations in your energy. So how do we determine our chronotype? The first thing you want to do is take out a pen and paper, or do it old school on a pen and paper, write it on your computer, whatever works best for you. We're going to want to find out these 3 items. The first thing you want to write down is, what time do you routinely fall asleep? So let's say on any given week, what is the normal time you usually fall asleep? And then write that time down. The next thing you want to do is write down, what time do you routinely wake up at? So what time do you routinely wake up at? And then the next step, once we have those 2 times, is to figure out what is the midpoint of your sleep. So if, let's say, on average, you sleep 8 hours. So let's say you routinely fall asleep around 11 p.m. You routinely wake up at 7 a.m. That's an 8-hour span. So we want to find the midpoint of your sleep would be 4 hours after 11 p.m. So that would be about 3 a.m. So for us math geeks out here, here's the formula. Take your total sleeping hours, divide it by 2, and then add it to the time that you fall asleep. So that's what your sleeping midpoint is. So I'll give everyone a moment just to be able to figure out their sleeping midpoint. And then we'll identify what does this mean, Scott? Once we identify the midpoint, well, how does this impact me personally? Okay, so once you have your midpoint, you'll tend to fall into what they call the 3 different categories here. If your midpoint is between 12 and 3 a.m., so 12 p.m. and 3 a.m., you tend to be called what is called a lark. If your midpoint is closer to 3 to 6 a.m., you'll be called a third bird. And then if your midpoint is more between 6 and 10 a.m., it would be considered would be an owl. So as we know, the night owl, right? And so I want you to keep these in mind, because as we jump into the next exercise, we'll actually look at how do you align your tasks accordingly. And so we're going to take a look at this, and we can come back to this just so everybody understands. So think about it, either lark, third bird, or owl, and then we'll identify how does this look for you based on these 3 things. So I want us to look a little bit about the difference between tasks. And why don't we leverage the Q&A again for this? Let's think about what are the difference between analytical tasks and insight tasks. And so when we understand these 2 things, it'll help us give a better idea as to what requires more of our energy. And so when we think about analytical tasks, it can be something that really requires focus. It's problem solving, decision making. These things might revolve around, maybe doing different casework or reviewing your strategy or writing reports. So it's things that tend to be a little bit more analytical. When we think about insight tasks, it tends to be something that requires a little more creativity, brainstorming, inspiration. So this could be maybe thinking about a new way of attracting clients to your business. Maybe it's strategizing how to implement new group exercises and be able to serve them in that way. So coming at it more from a creative space. Now, one easy way that I like to think about this is, analytical tasks probably work best with a cup of coffee. You want to be energized, you want to be focused, it's exactly what you're thinking about. And when you think about insight tasks, well, maybe that goes better with a glass of wine. Now, I'm not encouraging that you drink coffee or that you drink wine while doing these tasks, all I'm saying is that it's an easy way to kind of remember as to when we're thinking about analytical tasks, they require a little bit more of our focus, and the insight tasks might create a little bit more creativity as you move forward. And so when we think about, come back to our exercise we just did here around determining your chronotype. When we're looking at the larks or the third birds, when do you think the best time for them to do analytical tasks would be? Would it be in the morning, in the later afternoon? Let's utilize the Q&A. I'd like to get some input here. So if you consider yourself a lark or a third bird, when is the best time to do the analytical tasks? So ones that require a little bit more of that focus. We have first thing, we have mornings, 9 to 11 a.m. Aaron says, yeah, right? So the third bird, it says that, okay, when it's an analytical task, I want to make sure I get that done first thing because it requires most of my energy. What about the owls? For those of you that consider yourself more owls, when would you want to actually prioritize those analytical or decision-making tasks? And type it in the chat here. So for the owls out there, when would it be the best for you to actually complete your analytical or decision-making tasks? So it tends to be more in the later afternoon. And so the idea there is that if you're considered more of a late owl, you probably have more energy and more focus later in the afternoon or evening to focus on these tasks versus in the morning. And so for our third birds and our larks, we want to look at doing those analytical tasks in the morning and then the insight, more creative work later in the day, and then flip that on its head for the owls in the room, doing your insight tasks more in the morning, and then the analytical decisions more in the afternoon. So one way we can look at that is using this graph here. And this applies specifically for the larks and the third birds. It's when we're looking at your peak tends to be a little bit earlier in the day. So that's the best time for analytical tasks. And then as your day goes on, you'll notice that, have we ever experienced that afternoon slump? And so the energy levels start to go down a little bit. And so maybe that's a perfect time to do some of that admin work or routine calls that we talked about, or any of that work that doesn't require a lot of focus. And then there tends to be a bit of a rise again towards the evening. And so that might be a great time for insight problems. And so I'd like to use this graph as a way of when I'm thinking about planning my day, how am I planning my day according to energy levels? And so if you have any questions about this, I encourage you to put them in the chat. I know we have Jen taking care of the chat here, and so she'll take note of that, and we'll take time towards the end to be able to answer any of those specific questions. Jumping on to the next focus here, we're going to be looking at business focus periods. And so when I'm talking about a business focus period, let me describe it a little bit further as to what does this look like. The idea here is that a lot of time, our most important work tends to only get our focus once it becomes urgent. I'm curious, is that maybe giving a thumbs up? Does that ever resonate with you? If you have some really important work that needs to get done, does it only get focused on once you actually need to do it? Does that urgency to come up, right? And so the idea here is that, well, something needs to change about that. If it's called important, maybe it deserves your energy earlier than when you actually apply it. And so an easy way to do that is to focus on what I call a business focus period. It's setting a weekly meeting with yourself for that deep focused work. So whether it be your case notes, whether it be a research paper, whatever that might look like for you, it's setting that time isolated and free from distraction so you can get into a bit of that flow state and having that on a regular basis. So here are a few tips on how you can do this. One is put it in the calendar. Schedule it as if it's a scheduled meeting with a recurring client. You want to treat this as if it's a meeting with a recurring client and it's as important as that meeting with the client. And so when I say as important as a meeting with a client, I mean, it's not easily forgotten. It's not easily pushed aside. I mean, I can imagine that, if you started canceling your clients regularly, they likely wouldn't keep showing up for you. Now, the same has to be said about this business focus period. You don't want to cancel it regularly because then you're not putting or prioritizing the energy and time for yourself. So look at putting in the calendar, look at making it something that is recurrent on a recurring basis, likely at the same time. Next thing is you want to be proactive. How often has it happened where you start to get to work on something and then all of a sudden you're distracted by something else? An email comes in, maybe it's somebody in the office that distracts you. The idea here is try to be in an environment as best as you can, free from distraction interruptions. And we'll actually touch on that a little bit later as to how you can manage different distractions and how they come up. The last piece here is look at cultivating focus. Really understand and identify, well, I've set aside 60 minutes for myself today. What am I looking to accomplish? At the end of the 60 minutes, what do I want to have done? So by really identifying that end goal, it allows you throughout the process to make sure that what am I working on right now is still fulfilling that end goal. Now, I'll be honest, this probably, don't expect this to work out perfectly the first time. But over time, what can happen is that the more that you're able to keep this in your schedule, the more that you're able to be proactive and cultivate that focus required, those important tasks start to get ticked off, not just when they're urgent, but rather when they're meaningful for you and help make that progress for yourself. So clarity on what matters helps provide clarity on what doesn't. So what are some ways in which we can actually develop greater focus? So what are some focus habits that we can implement here? And so a few things that come to mind, put your phone out of sight. It's not enough to have it, flipped upside down next to you. Studies show that even if you just see the back of your phone, it can still lead to you thinking about, did I receive a message? Is there something to check? Actually have it hidden away. So whether that's in a drawer, under something, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. The next piece here is looking at eliminating distractions. So try and seek to eliminate distractions as much as possible. The third one here is actually externalizing thoughts. And I really love this one because I found like it's really helped from an attention management perspective. If you're working on something that requires your focus and all of a sudden you have a thought that you want to implement, or it's something that, I need to get back to so-and-so, just write it down. The act of writing it down will allow you, or can help take it off your mind and allow you to focus on what's actually in front of you. So I always have a pad and paper next to me. So therefore, when I'm working on something, I don't feel like I need to jump in and do it. Recognizing that our minds and our memories are not very good at remembering things and also acting things out at the same time, having that pad and paper next to you and just writing it down can be a great way to actually externalize those thoughts. Next one here is use caffeine strategically. So, don't make a habit of just utilizing caffeine, but use it strategically when you're actually noticing a bit of a slowdown in your energy. I won't go too much into this because anyways, use caffeine however you see fit. The last one here is the second last is taking refreshing breaks. How often, do we take those breaks, and how often are they actually refreshing, and how much do we come back feeling even more depleted than we were in the first place? The last suggestion here for a focus habit is looking at batching tasks. If you're doing emails, instead of doing emails one by one, look at doing them, within a half-hour period. So it's dedicating time to really do those types of tasks all at the same moment. So I'm just going to check in the Q&A here just to see if anything specific is coming up. It seems like we're all on the same page. So the last tip I wanted to provide around this is called the Pomodoro Technique. Now, has anyone heard of the Pomodoro Technique? Can you give me a thumbs up if you have? Yeah, so a few people. Okay, a few people, that's great. And so the idea here is with the Pomodoro Technique is that our energy and focus tends to kind of come a bit in waves. And so it's talking a little bit more about what if you can carve out short periods to sprint on specific activities rather than trying to run a marathon on, we'll come back to the research paper. I think it's relevant for everybody in the room here. So we'll just use that as an easy example. And so if you're looking to do a research paper, It's saying instead of allocating a full 90 minutes without breaks and you'll just try to power through, it's looking at working in smaller sprints with shorter breaks in between. So here's the step-by-step process and how you can incorporate the Pomodoro technique. The first thing here is decide on what is the task you're looking to get done. So kind of think about that end goal again. What am I looking to accomplish? How am I looking to spend my time? Then set a timer for 25 minutes and free from distraction, focus solely on that one task for full 25 minutes. So work until the timer rings. And then after that, take a 5-minute break. And then come back to doing the 25-minute session again. The idea behind this is that by working in these short sprints with smaller breaks, it allows us to be able to maintain focus for longer periods of time. You'll notice anyone that's utilized the Pomodoro technique that after doing a few short 25-minute sessions, you'll actually want to take a bit of a longer break. So that's why we say here, take a 15 or 30-minute break if you've done these a little bit more regularly. Okay. The next thing here is, I heard somebody write, or we wrote it in the draining tasks, is routine tasks can be draining. And so I want to include here a little bit about what can we do about those routine tasks or items that'll help us, maintain our energy throughout the day or throughout the week. So one way we can do that is looking at minimizing it. If you have a task that comes up regularly, let's say case notes, then it's trying to understand, how can I minimize the time spent on the case notes? Is there a template I can use to make it easier every time that I'm looking and completing something with a client? Is there anything, moving into the second piece here, I can automate? Is there portions of this task that I might be able to automate to make it easier for me? The next question I'd like to ask here is, well, what portion of this, if not anything, can I actually delegate? Maybe it doesn't apply to case notes. Maybe it's something else. But if you have these routine tasks that come up regularly, can you delegate some of it if you're in a position to? And if so, what does that look like? And then the last piece here is, how often have you had a task on your to-do list? And week by week, it just stays there. Week by week, things just keep piling above that task and it keeps getting pushed down. Does anybody resonate with that? Maybe we'll use the emojis again. We have a couple of people here that resonate, right? If a task has been on your list for longer than a few weeks or longer than a few months, maybe it's time to eliminate it. It's clearly not important enough to tackle, and it'll actually free up some of that energy to be able to focus on what really matters. So when looking at routine tasks, think about minimize, automate, delegate, or eliminate. All right, so moving on to the next section here, we're going to talk a little bit about managing distractions and the importance of refreshing breaks. And so I'm going to need your help with this one. We're going to actually help fill out this chart around how do we manage distractions. So first thing here is, when thinking about distractions, they tend to fall into two categories. Either they're probably a little bit annoying, or maybe they're fun and bring a sense of joy. On the flip side, they can also be either outside your control, so you have no control, or they're within your control. So something that you do have control over from a distraction or interruption standpoint. So I'm going to ask us again here to leverage the Q&A, and I'd like to hear from you. What are maybe some annoying distractions and interruptions that might be outside of your control? So let's see here. So we have Chloe who says, I find taking short breaks help get me lose focus. Sorry, Chloe, we'll just come back to that one. So Megan here says, in terms of annoying outside my control distractions or interruptions, to be noises, Janet, phone calls, family contacting you during the workday. I check in, Veronica, if they're contacting you, do you have control over if they're contacting you or not? So incoming phone calls, I would say the same thing. Fire alarm, yeah, we'll put that in the outside of your control. Let's hope at the very least. Lisa here says tech issues, definitely outside your control and most definitely annoying. Dog barking, I hear you on that one. So other things that, that just tend to take away from our focus, right? Whether it's disrupting our environment from a noise perspective or pulling our attention or energy away, it can be really, really distracting. So some of the things I have coming up here are, interruptions, pointless meetings. I had a webinar that I hosted, and someone wrote COVID-19, and I felt like I had to put that onto the list of annoying outside of our control distractions or interruptions. And then, family and pets definitely fall into that category of outside our control and annoying. Otherwise, when we're thinking about things that we actually get joy from that are outside our control, that might look like, it could be friends or colleagues interruptions, right? I would consider maybe, I need to get more credits for my accreditation. So taking a training, maybe it's outside your control. Hopefully it falls in the fun category. I might be biased on that one. And then, family and pets, once again, sometimes they could be annoying. Other times they can actually bring a lot of joy to us and, tend to be outside of our control. When we're thinking about things that are within our control, and I noticed going through some of the questions and some of the comments from last time, phone calls, notifications, those types of things are actually within your control. And so I'm not saying, I have some parents that say, well, I need my phone on me in case the school calls. And that is understandable. But there are ways that you can look at in terms of, well, having emergency numbers be able to come through if you have Do Not Disturb, or there's other things along those lines that you can put in place just to help get a little bit more focus. It's not saying that'd be perfect, but, looking at, managing some of these things can actually be quite helpful. I have cleaning desk here just because I don't know if I'm the only one, but sometimes it's a form of procrastination. I decide that I'm just going to shuffle around some papers, and 20 minutes later, I have the Lysol out and I'm actually washing the desk down and everything else. So, that's probably an annoying and within my control distraction that might come up at times. Otherwise, in terms of fun, that can be either being online, social media, shopping, browsing, taking an extended lunch, even lengthy research at times. You can really get in the zone and really try to, do things. It can be a form of distraction, or even articles and blog posts. And so now that we've raised our self-awareness around these different types of distractions and interruptions, what are we going to do about it? I think that's the real goal here, is that we understand these things come up, but what can we do about it? So the first thing you want to look at is anything that you would consider to be annoying and outside your control, you want to minimize. Try to minimize it as much as possible. If you have a colleague, somebody interrupts you, family, friend, whatever that might look like, and you're not in the mood or not there to be interrupted, just look at minimizing that as much as possible. It's happened, the interruption has already been there, minimize it and look to move on. The same thing can be said about the ones that are fun, but rather than getting frustrated of them, just enjoy them in the moment. The dog or cat comes and jumps up on your lap when you're in the middle of trying to do a meeting or in the middle of working on something. Enjoy it in the moment. And the reason I say that is because when trying to focus and when trying to manage your energy, coming at it from a place of joy is so much easier than coming at it from a place of frustration or anger or angst. And so they're outside your control. Just look at enjoying it in the moment and then moving on to what you're working on again. And I think this can really apply, especially to younger kids that can easily distract us throughout the day. Now the fun one, if something is within your control, it's up to you to proactively eliminate it. It's really looking at how can I proactively eliminate these things so that I can focus my energy on what really needs to get done here. It's definitely the hardest one, but the one that would have the biggest impact in the long term. I'll ask if there's any questions here. Feel free to put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to jump into looking a little bit more at when is the best time for a break. And so if we're looking at this battery here and we have, at 25, 50%, 75, 100%, when is the best time to take a break? Is it when you're down here on the left-hand side at only 25%? Is it even further than that when you're at zero and now it's okay, now that I'm at zero, I'll actually take a break? The idea about taking a break isn't waiting until you're so depleted that taking a break only gets you back to 25%. I have here Suhanak, I hope I pronounced that right, who says 75 to 50%. So when you're looking to take a break, it's usually in between your 75 and 50% zone. So the best time for a break is before you need it. The best time for a break is before you need it. And so I want you to keep that in mind. If you're already feeling really drained and tired, you've already surpassed the point that is the best time for a break. Look at taking that a little bit earlier, right? And it's a practice. It takes a little bit of a while to be able to build up that self-awareness around what we do about these things. So at times, the most productive thing you can do is to take a break. So I want you to give yourself that permission, especially for a lot of the high performers out there that are really looking to accomplish a lot, get as much done in their day as they can. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take a break. And that is the most productive thing you can do. So talking about breaks, we touched on it a little bit in the beginning of the presentation here, but I'd like us to think about, what are some short and what are some longer breaks that we might be able to take through our day or week or just on the regular basis. So when we're thinking about short breaks, I think a major theme that came up at the beginning was, getting outdoors. So taking a walk, stretching, meditating, journaling, even, for those that are power nappers out there, taking a 12 to 20-minute power nap in your day can actually be quite helpful in providing you that energy to come back to what you're doing. And so I'd encourage you to actually start to create your own short break list. Write down a short break list. And anytime you start to feel like your energy levels are starting to dip, make it as easy as possible to look at that list and pick from that list and say, okay, this is something I want to do, and go out and do it. Recognizing that, taking breaks and prioritizing yourself sometimes is not always the easiest thing to do. When we're looking at longer breaks, that can range anywhere from, going on a hike, exercising, getting a massage, socializing with others, reading for pleasure, even planning for a vacation can be a way, and then taking the vacation, let's hope, of actually having a refreshing break. And so I encourage you to think about, what are your short and long refreshing breaks, and how can you incorporate them more regularly into your day-to-day? The last thing I'll touch on under refreshing breaks is, do we have anybody in the room here who has trouble disconnecting at the end of the day? Has trouble, kind of taking their work hat off and putting it down and actually allowing themselves to disconnect and make that shift from work mode into more personal mode, right? And so you're not alone in feeling this way. A lot of people do, and I can imagine, especially in the field that you're working in. And so what I would encourage you to do is make disconnecting part of your daily routine. And so an easy way to do this is to actually create a habit around it. Create a habit around disconnecting. And the way that I like to do this at the end of the day is to ask myself just a few questions to help kind of close out the day. And so a few of the things I ask myself is, what did I accomplish today? How often do we, go day by day and not really acknowledge the progress that we're making or the things that we've done? So on a daily basis, taking that moment to think about what did I accomplish today can be really helpful in being, motivated, energized in terms of what you're working on, what you're doing. The next is looking at tomorrow. What will I focus on tomorrow? What does my day look like tomorrow? Will help give you a better picture as to, how you'll spend your time and energy the next day. And then the last one here that I really enjoy is asking yourself, what am I grateful for? And the reason I bring this up is because it's very challenging to both be stressed and grateful at the same time. And so by ending your day on a grateful note means you're ending your day on a more positive note. And so I'm just going to pause here for a moment. And I think there's a few people who have their hands up. I'll just check in with Jen. How do you want to handle those? Do people come off mute, or do they type their questions in the Q&A?
No, I can allow them to talk. First up, I have David Moulton. He's had his hand up for a while. Sorry, David.
All right. My apologies, David. I must not have noticed.
I didn't know I had my hand up.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you, Scott. This has been great. I think I'm going to sign up for some coaching, actually, so I'll be getting a hold of you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
All right. Then we have Barbara. Barbara, are you there? Barbara, oh, there we go.
I didn't know I had my hand up either, so.
Okay, all right.
The hand up function and the emojis are very close to each other, so I completely understand. I've been
It
there as
doesn't
well.
show. Yeah.
No worries at all.
That was it.
That was it?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Sounds good, Jen. We're going to jump in now to the action planning. How often do we go to these presentations and, write out all these notes, have all these things that we want to accomplish, and then a few weeks goes by and nothing has really changed. And so for us here at Intuity and for myself, our goal is really to help you bridge the gap between knowledge and action. And so how we do that, or how we can do that, is looking at building better business habits. And so let's take a look at what are some of the business habits we covered here today. And I want you to acknowledge what is one thing that you think will have the biggest impact on managing your daily energy levels based on what we've discussed so far. And so the goal here isn't trying to accomplish everything all at once, but just focusing on the one thing that will have the biggest impact for you. And then we're going to create a plan around that. And so the first thing that we want to look at here are a few of the things that have come up so far. What's my chronotype? Planning my day according to energy levels, plan for those analytical insight tasks, being proactive to help manage distractions, looking at the Pomodoro Technique or refreshing break list. And so when you're thinking about what has the biggest impact for you, let's make that real. Let's really transfer that into something that's real. So how we can do that is, I'm going to quickly go through it just because I know there are some questions at the end that people are waiting to be responded to. And so whenever we're looking to build a new habit, there's always some type of trigger, whether it be the time of day, location, after an event, social influence, or emotional state that triggers a certain reaction. And that triggers our current behavior. And the best and easiest way to change our behavior is to actually replace it with a new habit, replace it with something else. And so I want you to create a commitment statement just like this. So it means when X happens, so that is when I am triggered, instead of Y, which is your current behavior, I will Z. So I'll incorporate this new business habit. So I'll go through a few examples, and then I want you to take a minute or two to be able to create your own commitment plan here. So a few of the examples can look like when I am planning my day, so maybe that's the trigger, instead of reacting to what comes up, I will prioritize tasks according to my chronotype. So that was what we covered at first, the larks, the third birds, and the owls. So identifying fluctuations in your energy and being able to align your tasks accordingly. Another example might be, when I find myself not making progress on those big projects, so those important projects that we wait until they become urgent, instead of prioritizing what's urgent, I will schedule a business-focused period. So when I, instead of, and I will. So that's what we're looking to do here. So the last example I have is, when I'm feeling tired or drained, instead of pushing through, I'll take a refreshing break. So I would like you to create your own commitment. So take a moment and write this down, and write down, what is your trigger? What is the current behavior you have? And what is the new behavior you're looking to incorporate or elicit? So I'll give everyone just 1 minute here to do this on their own, and then we'll jump into some of the Q&A. Okay. And so for the sake of time, if you haven't completed this, that's okay. Make sure you write down what the commitment structure looks like. And I encourage you to take a moment to be able to go through this on your own as well. The last thing I want to do is put out an offer. So if anybody is interested in pursuing coaching or would like to learn a little bit more about what coaching might look like, both myself and our Intuity coaches have made ourselves available. And so what I'll do is I'll actually share a link in the webinar chat. Feel free to book a call. We're more than happy to offer a complimentary coaching session to allow you to better understand some of your working habits, areas for growth, and even talk a little bit further about what coaching looks like for you, if that's of interest. More than happy to set the time aside. And so I want to thank everybody very much. I just put this, I'm just putting the Calendly link in the chat here. So if you are interested in booking a call, more than happy to do that either with myself or one of our coaches will be there to support you. If you enjoyed this, I want to say, don't thank me. Thank Susan, thank Jen, thank everybody that helped put this together as part of the community and the CCPA Association. So give them a big thanks, and I thank them for having me here today. And so I'll end on that note, and we'll take some time to answer some Q&A questions that we have lined up here.
Scott, there was just one of the questions that came up a couple of times is that people were wondering about, they were wondering about the slides. And I wasn't sure if that's something we don't always do that. So I just thought we'd answer that question. But just to let everybody know, we are going to be posting the recording on YouTube where you can view it, but not download it. We're not going to email it to people, just to let you know.
Yeah, and so I think for that, by having the YouTube access, where I would suggest going, if you have any tidbits or any things that you want to look back at, I think that might be the best place to be able to go back and get some information for.
Jen, did you want to read the questions? I know there's quite a lot, so we'll see if we can get through them.
Yeah, sure. They were coming out like rapid fire over here. Okay, lots of slide questions. Sorry, just waiting through them. How does this work if you work in crisis response and the people come with major issues, no matter our personal energy?
Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to, okay, there we go. Can you repeat the question, Jen?
Yep. How does this work if you work in crisis response and the people come with major issues, no matter our personal energy?
Yeah, and so that's definitely a very challenging situation to be put in. It seems like, to me, I would look at that like a lot of that seems to be outside of your control, kind of like when we were looking at the difference between distractions and interruptions, looking at, well, what is within my control, what is outside of my control. And so in that situation, I'd really encourage you to think about, what are the things that I have control in based on my environment and recognizing that I'm in crisis response. And then what are the things that I don't are outside my control, and try to really just focus on those that you have within your control and focus on optimizing that area, recognizing that it seems like in that type of situation, there's a lot that's outside your control and can be difficult to manage. That's the best response. It's not an area of my expertise specifically, to be transparent, but that would be my response to the question.
Thank you. There's another one. What about exhausted new parents or parents with toddlers?
Yeah, my partner is actually pregnant, and we're actually expecting in 2 months from now. So I will let you know more specifically, maybe in the next presentation. Again, I think that's a tough one to answer, but I would come back to focusing on what's in your control and, how can you approach it as a team and leverage both the resources of both yourself and your partner. And then looking back at those refreshing breaks, whether it's raising a child, whether it's in a work environment, prioritizing yourself sometimes can actually be the most important thing. And so looking at, being able to leverage the resources you have and be able to take some of those refreshing breaks, even if they're really short, to help re-energize a little bit in your day.
For sure. How do you consider eating times as part of energy management?
Sorry, Jen, can we repeat that one again?
How do you consider eating times as part of energy management?
Yeah, and so from a nutrition perspective, I can't speak to it specifically. What I will speak to is making sure you're taking your lunch away from your desk. You're not like I guess the question is like, how productive are you if you're eating and trying to work at the same time? Like, how much are you really getting done? You maybe use your lunchtime as a way that is more productive, more of a refreshing break. So even if you find yourself, during the times that you do eat, and making sure that you prioritize your health and nutrition, whatever that looks like for you, But maybe instead of scrolling on the phone and looking at things during that time, what if you take that time to actually decompress, to actually maybe eat outside, try to incorporate some of those things that we feel bring us energy at the same time while we're eating can be quite helpful, or an easy break to take throughout the day.
This one's not really a question, it's more of a statement, but I thought it was kind of interesting or important. Sometimes I beat myself up because I didn't finish what I thought I should.
Yes. And so whoever wrote that, you're not alone. I would bet that there's a lot of people, not just in this room, but everywhere, that have experienced something very similar, right? It's this cycle between, well, I've set this bar for myself, I didn't accomplish it, and then what is my self-worth and everything else that comes up along those lines. And so what I would encourage around that is, how can we be more realistic with what we're looking to accomplish? If you continue to set out your day and say, this is what I want to do, and you keep falling short, then maybe what you're setting up isn't actually realistic. Plan for those fires, those those things we haven't planned for to come up, because we know unplanned things come up quite often in our day. And so if you can actually identify space for those, then it can be quite helpful in being more realistic with what you can accomplish, and that'll help boost the confidence and everything else that comes along those lines.
Somebody put like a suggestion in the box as well. When I procrastinate, instead of doing my case notes, I will use the Pomodoro method.
Okay, no, that's a great tip. And so when I find myself procrastinating, instead of putting something aside, I'll use the Pomodoro technique, set aside that 25 minutes, and all I'm committing is 25 minutes of my time to this. It's not thinking that I have this big long project to do, but rather I'm only committing 25 minutes. Can sometimes be a little easier of a getting started point than thinking to commit to something over the long term.
Somebody else, last one, I'm just being mindful of the time. Somebody has chronic illness and they want to know how they can incorporate their energy management.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I would consider that I wouldn't want to be speaking out of turn. And so I'll preface this by saying, that that's definitely outside of my area of expertise. But coming back to the same thing with the person that we talked about from crisis management, looking at, what is within your control and what is outside your control, and look at focusing on those two things. And then I guess coming back to what's realistic, very often what I see with coaching clients is that, we tend to compare ourselves to our best selves. We look at the past, we think about the time when we were at our complete best, and then we always hold that same standard for ourselves, despite changes in our situation, despite changes in our health. And so if you find yourself comparing yourself to your past and they're beating yourself up because of it, I take that step back and just look at trying to improve on yesterday. Look at focusing on progress over perfection.
Yeah, I think that's it for the questions. If Susan, you want to take over from now?
Well, I just want to thank you, Scott, for coming back again. We had you before, and this is great. And we had an overwhelming registration, so we're really excited about that. And I really like the engagement piece too, with everybody being able to ask questions in the chat. So thank you very much for coming today and being part of our Wellness Month for CMP Month. And everyone else who, if you've enjoyed it today, please sign up for other registrations. We've got lots of more webinars to come. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Susan, for having me in the community and association. And thank everybody for showing up, taking the time out of your day to invest in yourself. And I hope you found something helpful based on what we talked about.